San Diego Comic-Con just happened, and it is such a good time to be a Lord of the Rings fan. This past weekend, we got so many new updates on the Rings of Power show and the War of the Rohirrim, two projects both set to come out this year. We also heard from Middle-earth Enterprises about the new Hunt for Gollum movie, set in Peter Jackson's universe, directed and starring Andy Serkis, alongside a little bit of news from the new Tales of the Shire game. I took part in every Tolkien event I could at SDCC this year. I was at the Rings of Power panel at Hall H. I also went to the exclusive Rings of Power party put on in conjunction between the OneRing.net and Amazon, and I also went to the OneRing.net's panel, which featured creatives from the War of the Rohirrim movie, as well as the president of Middle-earth Enterprises, the company that actually owns the right to Tolkien films. So consider this video your one-stop source of news for all things Lord of the Rings from San Diego Comic-Con. I don't want you at home to feel like you missed out on anything by not going to Comic-Con, so I'm going to go through every single question that was asked at these panels and parties to make it feel like you were there. And also, spoiler warning about literally everything. So now that that's out of the way, let's get started with the Rings of Power. They had a panel in SDCC's biggest room, Hall H, and it was filled to the brim. When the lights went down, we were treated to a spectacular musical performance by the magnificent Bear McCreary, who does all the music for the show. He conducted Sauron's theme alongside a drumline and a choir, and it really helped pump me up after I had to wait in line for 6 hours the day before to get a wristband. We then got a sizzle reel that was exclusive to Comic-Con of all of the rings being created, and we got a voiceover from Charlie Vickers' Sauron. This was filled with some cool visuals, but the main takeaway was that Sauron introduces himself with his elven name, Anatar. Fans who saw the trailer on Friday will note that he didn't say his name in it, but I can confirm that he will be calling himself Anatar, and I know that's going to make a lot of book nerds like myself happy. Then, the first members of the cast came out. Morfydd Clark, who plays Galadriel, Charlie Vickers, who plays Sauron, and Benjamin Walker, who plays Gil-Galad, and they each answered one question. Sauron's actor was asked what's in store for him this season, and he answered by saying that Sauron had a lot of moments off-screen last season because we didn't know it was him, but this season the camera follows him and we see his whole journey. Galadriel's actor was asked about how her character admitted her errors at the end of the first season, and where will we find her in season 2. Morfydd confirmed that Galadriel does realize her fault, and she also said that Gil-Galad does not fail to remind her either. Gil-Galad's actor was asked what's next for the King of the Elves, and he said that all of the elves have some learning to do. And instead of expanding on that, he said that he brought something special, and that's when we got to see the trailer for the first time. I won't talk too much about the trailer because I'm sure you've already all seen it at this point, but I will give a few of my thoughts. I love how Elrond realizes immediately that these rings were made in conjunction with Sauron and shouldn't be trusted. Like, he's always the voice of reason in the show, and I love it. On the flip side, Galadriel tells Elrond that she doesn't think her ring is deceiving her, and she thinks that it's guiding her, which I think is an odd choice. Galadriel was intentionally made to be a semi-unlikable character last season, and if they go this route twice in a row, I don't know how many fans will have her back when she does turn into a character that we're supposed to root for. Her arc in the last season was realizing that she had been taken for a fool, and I'd hate to see them use that same arc for her 2 seasons in a row. So I am glad when she then shares the information with Gil-Galad that the man that deceived her is indeed Sauron, instead of holding on to it for a fear of being reprimanded. I'm also actually excited for the Stranger's arc this season in Rune. It feels like it'll be more about him and less about the Harfoots. But most of all, I'm excited to see how the rings affect all of the different races. The elves, the dwarves, the men. It feels like we're going to get another really deep story between Prince Durin and his father, and that was one of my favorite parts of last season, so I'm all on board for that. Of course, it's cool to see the Ents and the Balrog and more battles in this trailer, but I'm really here for those deep emotional arcs that we'll hopefully get for each character throughout this season. Let me know your favorite part of the trailer, though. It seems like it's getting a lot more positive reception than everything during season 1, so I'm super happy about that. But getting back to Comic-Con, the crowd went ballistic when the trailer was shown. If there was any hate for this show last season, you would not have known it standing in that room. After we saw this, 13 more members of the cast came out, which is even big by Comic-Con standards, and alongside them were both showrunners, Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne. They started by giving us a breakdown of what to expect this season, and the thing that stuck out to me is that they said that this season will feel like a psychological thriller between Sauron and Celebrimbor. They're likely going to be locked away creating the rings this season, and I really want to see that slow burn of manipulation from Anatar. The actor who plays Elrond was then asked about his relationship with Galadriel during this season, and he said that he knows that she's done wrong, but he still really cares for her, so he's trying to toe that line. But the first really interesting question and answer came from Charles Edwards, who plays Celebrimbor. He was asked about his role during the season, and he said that Celebrimbor is feeling a bit adrift at the start. He just made these rings that were taken away from him. He's waiting to hear if they worked, and he feels semi-abandoned. And just when he's feeling that way, he gets a knock at the door from you-know-who. We were then treated to another exclusive clip that was only shown in the room. This was a behind-the-scenes look at how the rings were made from concept to reality, but it still did have a few clips from the actual show sprinkled in. One is where we see Celebrimbor talking to Sauron in human form, as Halbrand from the last season. He takes Halbrand into a room and asks him if the rings worked, and he's obviously so interested in his craft that he's willing to conspire with someone like Halbrand, and I like this. I like him willfully ignoring that Halbrand is morally questionable. Galadriel didn't mention to Celebrimbor that Halbrand is Sauron, so he's still somewhat blind to the danger here. We also saw a clip of Prince Durin and Disa getting an invitation from Celebrimbor, so we'll likely see them end up in Eregion at some point during the season to learn more about the rings. After this exclusive look, Charlie Vickers, who again plays Sauron, was asked, "Who's the true Lord of the Rings?" He said that it's thrilling, and at this time, Sauron doesn't have much, so it's not like he's in total control of this situation. It's a push and pull of power. Then the actress who plays Disa was asked about the rift between Prince Durin and his father, and if the rings are to blame. She said that Khazad-dûm in general right now is in an existential crisis, and then she laughed and said that Disa is set to solve the whole thing. She then said that the rings do solve some problems, but they come with their own. Robert Arameo, who plays Elrond, was then asked about how important his relationship with Prince Durin is this season, and he just kind of said that it was very important. Not a lot of subtext to crack here. The showrunners then chimed in just to emphasize what's going on in Middle-earth during this season. They compared this season to the nuclear age in our own history and how everybody wanted the biggest bomb back then. So it seems like this season will be where all of the different peoples of Middle-earth are racing to get the most powerful rings they can, and to get them first. The moderator then asked if we'll see a battle between Adar and Sauron this season, and Charlie Vickers teased us and said that Adar is actually the first character that Sauron meets as he goes back into Mordor. The actor that plays Adar was then asked if his character is evil, and he just said he was protecting his children. He wanted to make a home for them. He said that his work and mission was pretty much done by the time that he meets Sauron at the beginning of season 2. Then the showrunners were asked about what creatures we would see in season 2. And they said the Ents and the Balrog, obviously, because we saw them in the trailer, but they said that they prefer to show and not tell. And then we were treated to another exclusive clip in the room. We got to see more about the Barrow-wights as some of our main elves fight. We also got to see more about the Ents. Apparently Theo is one of the ones that gets to interact with the Ents this season. We also got to see more about the mysterious sea creature that we saw from the first trailer. Apparently that connects to this new clip in the second trailer where Miriel is walking out into the water. The Númenóreans say that this is how she will stand trial to see if she's guilty for her crimes, which I assume relates to the fact that she led the Númenóreans into a losing battle at the end of last season. We also got to see Arondir and Isildur facing some sort of worm that pops out from the mud, and we also got confirmed that one of the spiders that we saw in the trailer is in fact Shelob. We then moved back to questions, and it was for the actor who plays Elendil, and it was all about politics in Númenor. He talked about how the nation is in search of its soul. What kind of nation do they want to be? He says that Elendil has some impossible choices to make this season between the love for his country and the love for his daughter. He also hinted that there's a third option in the mix and that he might have feelings for Queen Regent Miriel. The actor who plays Elendil's daughter, Arianne, was then asked about her role. She said that her character will follow anyone who's going to help her avenge her brother, and then she gave a cheeky look to the guy who played Pharazôn. It's pretty easy to see from here that she's going to side with Pharazôn's politics, and this was already hinted at last season. But then, as if to make it even more apparent, the actor who plays Pharazôn simply just said, well, it's an obvious choice. Then, Miriel's actress was asked about how her values clash with the other Númenóreans. She answered that Queen Regent Miriel comes back from losing a battle that was already an unpopular decision in the eyes of her people. She's still trying to lead and do what she thinks is right, but heavy is the head that wears the crown. The actors for Arondir and Theo were then asked about how it was to spend time with the Ents, and Ismael Cruz Cordova said that he loves the Ents and they helped shape his teenage years. He then went on to say how much he loves the lore and that the Ents were created by Yavanna to protect the forest, and it just emphasizes how lovable of a cast member he is. He loves being in this world and his performance shows it. The actor who plays Theo said that if you don't love the Ents, you're just weird, and it's really cool to see how they look on screen because most of the time he was just acting next to a pole. The actor who plays Isildur, Maxim Baldry, was then asked about how his fight with Shelob went down, and he said that it was his favorite thing to film and that Shelob is one of the most legendary monsters of all time. He also said that he spent basically all season getting muddy, to which the showrunner said, when you look like Maxim or Ismael, all you want to do is shove him in mud. Sophia, who plays Disa, was then asked about how something is lurking under Khazad-dûm. She responded by saying that the Balrog is here this season, and then her eyes got really wide. She looked at the showrunners and she was like, was I allowed to say that? Was I allowed to say that? And she was like, oh yes, it was in the trailer. She also said said that we get to see Disa sing more this season as she uses her voice to communicate with the mountains in the stone. Then Megan Richards, who plays one of the Harfoots named Poppy, was asked about her role during this season. She says that as her, Nori, and the stranger travel through Rune this season, she's basically leading the party and she feels responsible for keeping them safe. She was also asked about a romance, and she ominously said, "We'll see." Daniel Wayman, who plays the stranger, was then asked about meeting a very special goat farmer this season named Tom Bombadil, and what else his role has in store. He said that last season, the stranger finally started to understand how his power courses through him, and the tables are flipped with Tom Bombadil. Suddenly, he's presented with someone else whose powers he can't understand. He just can't wrap his head around how the energy flows through Tom. But he also said that we'll get to see the stranger spar with Tom this season, and that should be really fun. But the best news of all is that he said that we'll get to hear them sing together this season, which for fans of Tom Bombadil is very welcome news. And with that, the panel turned to fan Q&A because the moderator had finished her questions. And the first question was actually kind of hilarious. It was for Charlie Vickers, and it was about how Sauron is famously a shapeshifter and can change his face. So was Charlie ever worried that he would be recast? Charlie laughed and sarcastically said, "Never!" But he also had this look on his face like he'd never really considered that option before. But he also said that within the Legendarium, Sauron technically does lose his fair form at one point, so he's curious to see how the showrunners are going to manage that. The next fan asked if any of the actors had fighting experience before taking on their roles, and if they had any fighting advice. I think he meant fight experience from prior roles, but Ismail took the question literally and said, "You only get one shot, don't miss it." The next question was about how elvish weapons are usually named, and the fan asked that if the actors had a weapon in real life that they needed to name, what would the name be? Benjamin Walker, who plays Gil-Galad, was laughing and he said, "I don't know what you mean because Eglos is mine. I'm taking Eglos home." And then Ismail said that he's actually already named his sword Rihanna, so he's sticking with that. Then Sophia, who plays Disa, was asked if she's going to be the voice of reason for the dwarves this season, and she said that there's a big chance of that. And then, in my opinion, the best question of the day was asked. A fan came up to the mic and said that his favorite character, Glorfindel, has been ignored in both previous Lord of the Rings adaptations, so he was wondering if we would be able to see characters like Glorfindel in Rings of Power. And then the showrunners dropped an absolutely baller move and just said, "Yeah, we're doing that." They said that 50 hours is a lot of screen time and we'll see a lot of surprising people pop up. He said that we'll see Celeborn as well, but of course we already knew that. Then this little kid came up and asked if Arondir is Theo's father. Of course he's not, and we all know that, but it was still a cute question because the kid was like 5. The showrunners came out and said that no, he isn't, but they did confirm that we will one day find out who Theo's father is, which was not an answer I was expecting to receive. There was then a question about what costumes the cast loves most this season, and Morfydd Clark responded saying that she loves Elrond's armor. Apparently he can actually move really well in that armor, and it's a really special feat in costuming. Plus, he added that his sword is absolutely magnificent. The showrunners then spoke up and said that every single prop and costume goes through a huge creative process, and that they basically have a mood board built out for everything. They then added that they especially loved Disa's outfit this season, and she apparently wears it to a coronation that goes awry. And given what we saw in the trailer, perhaps this means it's interrupted by the Balrog? Who knows, I'm just guessing, but I think I'm right here. Then a fan asked if we'll see any LGBTQ inclusion this season, and the showrunners responded by saying maybe you already have. I take this to mean that the Harfoots, Nori, and Poppy will probably have some sort of relationship going on this season, given how her relationship was already teased for Poppy earlier in this panel, and that the only 2 people around her are Nori and the stranger. And I just don't see Poppy getting with the stranger. I think that'd be too much of a stretch. We then got a question from a very shameless fan who said that their favorite couple to ship in the show was quote unquote hot Sauron and Galadriel. They then said, because we don't see them in the trailer at all, and because they parted ways at the end of last season, will Galadriel and Sauron have any scenes together? They then added that it would do wonders for the fanfic community, and the whole cast kind of laughed. Someone in the cast said that there might be hope for something like that, but then Charlie Vickers just came out and said, yes, we do have scenes together this season, which does mean that it's confirmed that Galadriel and Sauron will come back together face to face. Then another fan of the deep lore came up and asked if we'll see Maiar spirits or Ungoliant sometime soon. If you don't know what these are the primordial spirits who help shape the world alongside the Valar. And Ungoliant is a giant spider who helps enable the Dark Lord Melkor to destroy the 2 trees of Valinor in the Silmarillion. The showrunners were a little less willing to give a clear answer here, and they just said stay tuned. The next fan question was all about music and songs in the show, and they asked if they would get more of that in season 2. Ben Walker, who plays Gil-Galad, said that if the elves see a ripple in the water, they write a song about it. And then he went on to confirm that his character will actually be singing this season. The cast then egged him on to give us a little sampler, and he stood up and sang in Elvish in front of everyone in the room. But then, in the last question before the panel ended, One fan asked about Elrond's cloak and how it seems very tattered throughout the whole first season. Robert Arameo said that this was an intentional choice that he was involved in. He likes to believe that it's an ancient relic from another time, and he also added that he loves stories like the Fall of Gondolin. And for me, whenever an actor acknowledges the deep text, it makes me super happy that they're so committed to their role, and they want to learn everything they can to make it as good as it can be. And then the cast took one final selfie with the crowd and went on their way to the OneRing.net's private party, which I also managed to get a ticket to. I wasn't given a ticket, I managed to snag it off the Eventbrite like everybody else. And I also managed to win a ticket to the full cast signing. To get this ticket, you needed to go to the OneRing.net's booth and answer trivia for a chance to win. The question that they asked me was who plays Prince Durin in the Rings of Power, and luckily I knew that it was Owain Arthur. So I'll walk you through the event, the signing, and everything that happened at this small party that was limited to just 350 people. When I arrived, I was put right into the signing line. We walked past this beautiful photo op and were then led into a room where the cast would meet us. But before they came out, we were greeted by an orc in full prosthetics. He came in and started chanting for Adar in front of the crowd, and he also had a brief stare down with someone who was dressed as Gandalf, which was pretty funny. When the cast finally came out, we were given a choice of 3 posters to have signed. One was of Galadriel, one was of Celebrimbor, and one was of King Durin. I chose Celebrimbor just because of how integral he is to the creation of the rings, and after all, this show is called The Rings of Power. Plus, if you know the lore, you know just how large of a role that he's going to have this season. While we were getting our posters signed, we had the chance to chat with each cast member. And whenever I meet people like this, I always forget to ask them questions. I always just end up gushing about how happy I am for them. How happy I am that they get to play these characters that they've grown up with since they were children. Like, imagine being Maxim Baldry and being able to play Isildur. That is just incomprehensible to me. I did manage to ask him, though, about his fight with Shelob, and he said that it felt like a dream because that character is so iconic to him. And honestly, this cast is just like us. They love working on this show. I asked Cynthia Adai Robinson, who plays Queen Regent Muriel, about her scene in the water with the sea monster, and she said that she was basically in a tank of water for 2 straight days filming that scene. I told the actors who play Poppy and the Stranger that I was really excited to see what they were up to in Rune this season, and Morfydd Clark, who was right next to them, leaned over and was like, same. I then asked her if the cast knows about everything else going on during the season, or if they just get their parts of the script. She told me that they do get to see everything, but it's really hard to imagine what it'll actually all look like until they see it on the big screen. She said that the first time that they saw the trailer was in Hall H with us, so I think that's pretty special. Finally, I told Ben Walker, who plays Gil-Galad, that he's always been my favorite elf since I was a kid, and he got a kick out of that. After the signing, I grabbed my poster and was free to explore the rest of the party. My first stop was in the room filled with a bunch of costumes and props from the show. Right when you walked in, you saw Pharazôn and Queen Regent Muriel's costumes, and alongside those were Sauron's and Galadriel's. On the other side of the room, they had Tom Bombadil's, which I thought looked better than it did in the promo images. To me, those images looked a little bit like a bad cosplay, but in person, everything looked a little bit more worn in and realistic. Beside that was Adar's costume, and I've always thought that he had the coolest armor in the whole show. Well, that was until the Elven armor was unveiled for season 2, because just look at Gil-Galad's armor. Seeing his spear, Eglos, in person alongside this marvelously curvy armor set was a dream come true for a lifelong Gil-Galad fan like me. Lastly, we got to see Narvi's armor, as well as his size doubles for comparison. If you don't know, Narvi is a dwarven smith that we'll meet this season. He'll likely become pretty close with Celebrimbor and have a hand in creating the 7 dwarven rings. But speaking of rings, they had all 19 rings on display in the center of the room. These, of course, are the 3 elven rings, the 7 dwarven rings, and the 9 rings of men. And wow, it was really breathtaking to see those in person, especially the dwarven rings, because the gems that they used in those were huge. Notably absent was the One Ring, and I imagine that they'll save this for some sort of end-of-season reveal. However, I don't really know what they would do with the One Ring that would be different than what they did in the Peter Jackson trilogy. That ring is described in detail in the book, so there won't be a lot of artistic liberty they can take with it. Finally, in this room, we got to see what presumably will be Sauron's crown. I know Adar has it in the trailer, and he impales someone's back with it, but just design-wise, it makes sense that this would end up in Sauron's hands eventually. From there, I went into another room that was more meant for mingling. There were snacks, drinks, and even a 3D printing ring station where I was able to grab a replica of Galadriel's Ring of Power. I also randomly took one of the napkins because I thought they were cool. Like, it's a gold foil logo set on a really nice full-bodied green... Whatever, I don't need to explain myself. I like the napkin. But after that, I went back into the main room because the cast was leaving, and I got a few selfies with some of the core members of the cast, including Sauron himself. And before I left, I was able to have 2 pretty lengthy conversations with showrunner J.D. Payne and composer Bear McCreary. They were out amongst with the people meeting fans, and they were super generous with their time. It's so obvious how much J.D. Payne loves this world, and Bear McCreary is living his own dream. The whole event left me feeling very inspired, and even more than that, excited for the second season. And with that, my final stop for the evening was another OneRing.net event. They were hosting a panel for all things Lord of the Rings, not just Rings of Power. In fact, Rings of Power wasn't even really mentioned at all. They spent most of the time giving us updates on War of the Rohirrim, and even speaking with the president of Middle-earth Enterprises himself. I'll tackle War of the Rohirrim first, because that's what the panel started with. And to kick things off, we got a video message from Philippa Boyens, who wasn't able to be at the panel. This was mostly just a message to say hi and that she was sorry that she couldn't be there. But right after that, we were given the first ever sneak peek of footage from the War of the Rohirrim. And again, just want to throw out a spoiler warning because this is a lesser known Tolkien story and I'm about to dive into plot points. The first thing we saw was a montage of commotion happening throughout the streets of Rohan, and then we see King Helm Hammerhand strike one of his subjects. Lore nerds like me would know that this man is named Freka, and he was having disputes with the king and is then used as an example. The montage continued with a series of clips that just further enhanced the fallout that this act caused. And all of this was presented like a trailer, but afterwards came a full clip that was taken directly from the movie. We see Helm's daughter Hera, and she's riding her horse with a few friends. It seems like they're running away from something, and that the group has been split up. Hera turns back to find one of her friends running over a hill to catch up to her, but behind him is an enraged Mumakil. Her and her friends charge this Oliphant, and one of her friends manages to slice the underside of its belly pretty significantly. However, the Mumakil seems to shrug this off, and it turns around to face its attackers like nothing happened. Hera intervenes because she doesn't want this Mumak pursuing her friend, but just as she jumps in to attack it, the screen cuts to black. And I'd say that it looked pretty solid. Ever since the project was announced, it's always been a bit jarring to me that the next Lord of the Rings adaptation would be an anime, but it works. The art style is very Studio Ghibli-esque, and apparently the people that are working on it even have some ties to early Ghibli. But what really caught me off guard is the actual animation style that they're using. The characters involved in each scene look like they're straight out of an impressive Japanese anime, whereas the landscapes look like they were animated to look a little bit different. They almost look photorealistic in a weird way, and they contrast the actual characters heavily. I think because this clip happened so fast, it was hard for me to process everything in the moment. So I think, even though I was there, I'll need a bit more footage to truly process whether I think this animation style fits the story that's being told. But I'm a fan of Studio Ghibli and multiple other anime studios, so I'm sure it's going to turn out just fine. From here, we heard from panelist Jason DeMarco, who's a producer on War of the Rohirrim. He said that the project is a dream come true for him and that the whole crew is taking this very seriously. He then was asked about how this film is the first time that a female character is leading a Tolkien adaptation. For those of you who know about Tolkien's Legendarium, you'll know that all Tolkien wrote about Helm's daughter was that he had one. There was nothing else to expand upon it. But Hera is the main character of this movie, and I thought the reason that he gave is super interesting. He said that Helm made a grievous error when he struck down one of his subjects, and it basically divides his nation. A new king is ushered in, and this era of Rohan has a lot of moving pieces. The filmmakers wanted someone who has lived during these events and experiences them from the outside, and thus Hera was born. She's used as the constant thread in an ever-changing scenario, and I think it's a good idea. Considering that this movie is being made by and has the stamp of approval from the original Lord of the Rings filmmakers, I don't think there's much to worry about in regard to new and unknown characters. Jason then talked about the voice acting, and he said that they always knew they wanted an all-British cast. He said they ended up going with a lot of stage actors who had never done voice acting before. He said that some screen actors don't go big enough when it comes to animation, so he wanted bigger voices and personalities to really sell these characters. They then talked about how the film was being primarily made in Japan, and they asked if there was any trouble in paradise while trying to get things done from different regions. They said not really, because every team working on the project had their own specialty, but they did say that the Japanese production style is very different to that of New Zealand or England, so I think that all parties had to do a bit of learning to get this film made. Then, a member of the animation team at Topcraft talked about how his team has ties to Ghibli, and why anime is the right style to tell a Lord of the Rings story. It was an interesting answer, because he said that most people have a preconceived notion of what anime is. But in reality, he says that it's just a format, like capturing something on camera. Japanese anime can do anything, and Lord of the Rings is part of that. So it wasn't really a specific answer, but I do agree with it. At this point, the War of the Rohirrim folks left the stage, but we did end up getting some of the first ever licensed merch from the project. There were both pins and posters given out, but I only managed to snag a poster. It is pretty nifty though. It's a beautifully detailed map of Rohan. We then got the smallest update on Tales of the Shire, that new Animal Crossing-like game that's being developed by Weta Workshop. We saw a few new screenshots, but most of the OneRing.net folks were more excited about the fact that they had talked to the Weta crew about a very specific dwarven duck on the original poster. This duck has apparently been causing so much chatter online just because of how freaking cute he is, but the folks at Weta confirmed that it is not a random duck. The duck has a name. So that is the only update that we got here, but I think most folks will be happy knowing that we will get more Dwarf Duck in the future. Finally, the very last thing that happened during this panel was our chance to speak with the folks at Middle-earth Enterprises, who actually own most of the Tolkien rights directly and are responsible for what projects are made. They are a subdivision of Embracer Group who bought these rights in August of 2022. They aren't responsible for Amazon's Rings of Power or the Gollum game, but they're responsible for basically everything else. So, naturally, a bunch of us uber Lord of the Rings nerds were super excited for this portion of the panel. But I will say up front, even though I hate to say it, this conversation did not make me feel good about the hands that are holding Tolkien's work. This is the only part of the entire weekend that I wasn't supremely confident in the future of Tolkien adaptations to come. Most of the time, the panelists were speaking to Lee Gunchard, the president of Middle-earth Enterprises. But this is where the problems came in. I don't know if Lee just isn't a good public speaker or if he doesn't know that much about Tolkien's world, but it's one of those two options. Everything he said rambled on for too long, and he never got to the point of any questions, and it never really showed any love or affection toward the material. He talked about the first 2 years since acquiring the rights, and it sounds like most of that time has been spent going around meeting with different companies that they know they're going to be partnering with on productions. They obviously had to go meet with the Tolkien estate, and they had to meet with Warner Brothers, who historically have been the production company that are attached to most Tolkien films. They were able to extend that relationship with a new deal, which is why the Hunt for Gollum movie is being made. He also did say that he's seen the War of the Rohirrim movie, and he said it's great, even though he's typically not a fan of anime adaptations. And then he moved to another point about video games, and how he thinks a lot of good Lord of the Rings stories can be told through that medium over the next 5 and 10 years. And honestly, he would not stop talking about video games. I love video games as much as the next guy. I actually worked on the YouTube gaming team at YouTube for 3 years. But it's very obvious that this is his specialty and his priority. Embracer Group is mostly known for putting out games, so I really hope this doesn't take away from the focus of getting really good films done as well. One of the panelists, Matt, better known as Nerd of the Rings on YouTube, tried to change the subject and ask him about what he's learned about Tolkien's world from all of these meetings with different companies. And he didn't really comment on that at all. He just said that he joined a bunch of social media groups to see what people were saying. And then he dove back into talking about game studios, how amazing they are, and how most of them want to work on a Tolkien-centric project. And I believe him, that'd be cool, but he wasn't reading the room or displaying any inner love for the material. Then one of the One Ring staffers tried to bring him back to topic and ask him about the Hunt for Gollum movie. She literally lobbed up a softball and she was like, "Is there anything you can tell us?" And he was just like, "Details will come out from our partners at Warner Brothers." Like, dude, you came all the way to this panel in San Diego where fans are foaming at the mouth trying to get new information. You swerve a bunch of questions, you ramble about nothing, and then you don't give us the details on the stuff that we're actually excited about. The whole thing just left a bad taste in my mouth, honestly, and it's a shame because the day was going so well. Cliff from the OneRing.net then asked the last question about the contract that they have with Warner Brothers, because there's been some speculation online about how many films Warner Brothers is allowed to make for the Tolkien property. And again, Lee swerved the question, but this time he at least did end on a hopeful note. He didn't give us specifics, but he did say that if they're the same level of quality to the films that they've made historically, then they can make them forever for all he cares. And that was very welcome news. Since we're beginning this new set of films with the original production team and Andy Serkis at the helm, it's hard to imagine them kicking off on anything but a good note. But that was everything. That was every single announcement from San Diego Comic-Con concerning The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's other surrounding properties. As a summary, I was really jazzed about Rings of Power. This season looks like it's staying way truer to the lore. We get to see Annatar in his fair form, and hopefully this story will play out much closer to the text that we all know and love, since season 1 was a bit rocky starting off. As for the War of the Rohirrim, I honestly need to wait and see more. It looks like it's being made with a lot of love, but it's so disconnected from the live action stuff that I'm not too concerned about its level of quality. I feel like I just already know that it's going to be good, so it doesn't keep me up at night. But as for the folks at Middle-earth Enterprises, I just really hope that this guy's a bad speaker. He did seem really nervous, and I don't want to be too harsh on everything that he said, but he didn't instill a lot of confidence for us in the room. Hopefully there are many more people at Middle-earth Enterprises who love this world just a little bit more, and who are able to communicate that love into getting the right projects made. But so far, I can't really fault anything that they've done because The Hunt for Gollum really does seem like the perfect project to kick this all off. As for me, thank you so much if you've made it this far in the video. This is by far the longest video I've ever made, and I wanted to be really thorough so it felt like you were sitting in the room at Comic-Con with me. Please like this video, comment about your favorite piece of news, and subscribe if you want to help out a fellow Tolkien fan. To anyone that I met at the convention who sees this video, just know that you made my weekend and it was so fun talking with you all. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.